Welcome to Farm Your Daily, a Field Forward podcast. I'm your host, David Geiger. Today on Farm Your Daily, a major report was released earlier this week. We take a look at the aftershocks in the marketplace with Reese Drenth of the Ground Level Dispatch. Please be sure to like and follow the podcast as well as our social media at Field Forward Pod. We would love to have you join our community, keeping folks informed about what is affecting our farmers. This is Farm Your Daily. And joining me on Farm Your Daily, we're going to take a look at the marketplace. A pretty big week this week. Had that WASDE report out on Monday, along with a couple other reports from the USDA. To talk about that, we have joining us Reese Drenth of the Ground Level Dispatch. Reese, always good to talk to you about what's going on. And let's just dive into the aftershocks of that report. A lot of big numbers came out. Let's start off with that. Reese, what's going on here at the end of the week after that Monday announcement?
Yeah, we'll take a step back to Monday. Even then, we won't spend much time on it because no one really wants to. USDA came at us with a couple surprises: bigger corn yield and more harvested acres. The larger surprise of the two would be more harvested acres. We've already increased harvested acres a couple times since quote unquote final planted acres data was given to us back in June 2025. Somehow they just keep getting bigger, keep finding more, what have you. And so it gave us a lot more production than what the market was expecting. And we saw a very negative market post-report. Corn closing down nearly a quarter, 24, 25 cents. Soybeans did its best to follow them down as well. So, more supply in the corn space, on the corn balance sheet rather, and even with excellent corn demand, record exports, record ethanol production, big feed and residual use, it's just not enough to take that corn ending stocks estimate below 2 billion bushels. And so, the outlook for corn prices has certainly changed a little bit. We've certainly changed our tune, which we just kind of have to do when the government gives us that kind of data. But towards wrapping up the week here, markets closed pretty much kind of on a firmer note. I mean, and corn futures, March corn futures, last trade here for the week, 424 3/4. That is 8 cents off the low, roughly. Not much, but we'll take it, right? March soybean futures, roughly, the low on Monday is 1039, and we're going to close here around 1058. So about, almost 20 cents higher to close the week on nearby soybeans too, which, we'll take it. And as far as why it's happening, there's a couple different reasons. First and foremost on corn, I would say some of the strength that we've seen to end the week has kind of caught people off guard. There's a couple theories that we have working. First off, a record export program needs to be fed every day. That's a mighty big animal that needs fed. And when markets rip lower 25 cents in one day, that doesn't provide the marketplace with a lot of willing sellers. So it is still the job, especially in the export gate, to try to incentivize some sort of corn movement into a record export program. I think that's part of the reason why you're seeing, some stabilization and partially higher corn futures. I think also, if you think about the last 6 months, since 186 bushel the acre corn yield was printed back in August, if you remember, corn futures really ripped lower and then pretty much rallied ever since, slowly and surely. And here the same kind of thing is happening again after they raise it a half bushel. So, we haven't really believed 186 since they posted it back in August. Perhaps there's an argument to be made that we still don't believe it, especially when you raise corn yield a half bushel the acre. But, those are two working theories on corn. Soybeans, we can talk a little bit more about this at length too, but I'll just real quick hit on the fact that yesterday we got a good headline out of DC that the EPA was going to move forward with better biofuel blending quotas than what we've seen over the last really decade. They're going to improve biofuel blending quotas by about 2 billion bushels, or excuse me, 2 billion gallons, which if only soybeans were used for that 2 billion gallon increase, it would equate to like 1.3 billion bushels of soybeans, which is like 30% of the soybeans we grow in this country. So, that was some positive news that impacted both soybeans and soybean oil futures. And we're kind of seeing soybeans price in more firmness here today to close the week, probably on that note, which is a good thing too.
That's really interesting to bring up because it did feel, especially at the start, corn was the one that was really damaged by some of the reporting. What is the overall response from the marketplace of just USDA reporting in general after that delayed and government shutdown and some of the delays that happened? We enter this new year and there seems to be pretty drastically different numbers from what folks were anticipating. Is that something folks are going to internalize as we head into the next few months of reporting?
Yeah, that's a good question, a fair question. I think it's a tale of like two sides of what I would say would be like the Missouri River. I think your farmers in Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, parts of Missouri, really the core of the Corn Belt are looking at this data and saying, this doesn't make any sense. Last year, Iowa's corn yield was an average of 211 bushel the acre, a record. This year, Iowa comes in at 210, one bushel off that acre. Most of the folks we talk to that farm in the heart of Iowa say like, that's not true. They're not off one bushel the acre on their corn yield. They're off 5, 10, 15, maybe even 20 bushel year over year. Same thing can be said in Illinois. And while, I'll give the USDA this, like a lot of guys will tell you that, it wasn't our best year. Last year was our best year, but maybe it was the third or fourth best year, right? I mean, that's still significant. That still doesn't, especially in the I states, in the heart of the Corn Belt, that, the question is, does that indicate a 7.5 bushel increase in the national yield? I think if you're west of the Missouri River in Nebraska, the Dakotas, a little east of the Missouri River, we'll say western, west central, southwest, and northwest Minnesota in particular, they had a massive crop. All those farmers are swimming in corn, and I think they can understand the increase year over year in corn yield. So, we can debate it. Growers in the I states certainly don't feel it or believe it. Growers not in the I states in the Western Corn Belt do. It kind of is what it is. And then I do not see how we can USDA balance sheet our way out of this problem. It's not like the demand side can get any better. It's very unlikely that magically the USDA reduces yield or acres or whatever by 500-600 million bushels to get us out of this problem and into a bull market. It just kind of is what it is, and now we have to adjust our plans.
So let's take into account the market as a whole then. Corn, soybeans, and then also the commodities that were also residually affected. I know soy meal, in particular soybean oil, were aspects that may have had a little bit of a difference because of just the amount and intensity that folks have been putting into those commodities and products. Likewise, cattle have seen some pretty continued, not that that's abnormal, continued pretty massive swings across the board when it comes to their day-to-day trading. Is that all part of this report or shockwaves from the report, or is it just markets are settled back in and they're starting to trade per normal?
Well, soybean oil, like improvements there this week, is pretty much a direct result from the EPA headlines that we saw yesterday. Cattle, I would say, maybe we've seen some strength this week because of the weakness in corn. Obviously, cattle margins getting better, the price of corn gets cheaper. I will say also, the supply issue in the United States really is pretty dang far from solving itself on the cattle side of things. We are seeing an increase in the amount of New World screwworm cases in Mexico, not necessarily a decrease. So that just doesn't necessarily help either. Soybean meal is pretty well tied to soybean futures, more so than oil. And so weakness in soybean meal can be tied to, some of the early week weakness in soybeans. But yeah, they're all somewhat connected, but they also have their own things going on.
Reese, I know before the year ended, 2025 ended, I asked you some questions on expectations for 2026. And a lot of folks, including yourself, were saying, well, we kind of need to see what's in that WASD. But now, past the WASD, I'll ask the question again. What's the forecast? What are we looking at here as a whole for the rest of the year?
It's a great question. On the corn side of things, what I would say is that the market needs to do two things because we have too much corn. It either needs to disincentivize planted acres this spring by pricing lower, like moving prices lower, or bean markets need to try to incentivize more acres by taking bean prices higher. We've got too much corn on our hands. The issue with option 2 is that South America is about to ramp up harvest of another record soybean crop. So it doesn't really feel like ripping soybean acres or futures higher and subsequently soybean acres higher due to a large price increase in soybeans is that likely. And we see another issue for 2026, to get into the weeds here a little bit, David, and that has to do with crop insurance. So here, I'll tie this all together, but crop insurance, because the big beautiful bill in all its wonder back in this summer when it passed, this will be the cheapest you can buy an insurance policy on your corn and beans ever. Especially when you consider that you can buy 95%, in some cases, maybe even over 95% into 105% crop insurance, revenue protection crop insurance, cheaper than ever. And so the issue with that is, I just got done saying that corn acres probably need to go down this spring. We've got too much corn laying around this country. That's what the USDA says. And that's what the markets need to figure out, how to price that into the equation so farmers don't plant corn. The issue is when you take a product like crop insurance at 95% revenue protection, which means 5% of your estimated average revenue is your deductible. So if you lose 6%, if you lose 6% of your revenue, let's say next year, you get an indemnity payment. That's how that works, right? When you balance out how many dollars per acre you can guarantee yourself with your revenue protection insurance policy on corn versus beans, the math today is 200 to 300 bushel dollars per acre in favor of corn. Okay, so said another way, if you're having to choose between whether or not to plant corn or beans this spring, today you can lock in a $300 an acre better revenue guarantee through crop insurance planting corn versus planting beans. Okay, so we know a couple things. We know that the market needs to incentivize less corn acres because the USDA says we have a bunch of corn out there and we need less supply to balance the balance sheet. But we also know that given crop insurance economics, growers in most areas have zero incentive to actually do that, to actually reduce corn acres. They have about a $200 to $300 an acre incentive to actually increase corn acres. So what does that mean for the outlook? Okay, that's the scenario. The outlook, in our opinion, is that in the next few months when we're making planting decisions, especially if corn rallies into the next few months, we are not going to reduce corn acres. So what does that mean for a strategy for 2026? We need to be selling the curve. We need to be selling forward. We need to be thinking about new crop corn today. We need to be thinking about selling new crop corn tomorrow. We need to think about selling new crop corn next week, next month. I mean, I'm belaboring my point a bit, but there's going to be carry in the market. And also, it seems like today there's going to be a lot more corn acres than what we need come this spring, which means that if we have another decent growing season, I don't know if we're going to be able to hang on to the 4 handle in corn futures. It's probably more of a $3 scenario. So that means we need to be locking in prices today for next year. On the soybean side of things, it really all has to do with this biofuel policy. South America has a big soybean crop. They're going to grow more acres next year because they just keep cutting down trees and turning them into bean fields. That's not positive for our export program here in this country. But if the government does this right and they increase biofuel blending quotas and they limit U.S. oil companies from importing foreign feedstocks to put in that would compete with U.S. biodiesel and U.S. soybean oil, then you start to solve that South American problem with domestic demand here in this country. So on soybean side of things, yes, South America is going to limit price expansion opportunities here. But if we get this biofuel thing right, we're going to need more soybean acres in this country planted this spring. And so it's a very long-winded answer to your question, but in short, the plan for 2026 has changed, and we need to be selling next year's crop, and we need to be selling the carry on corn, and we can be a little bit more patient and wait and see how the government plays this thing from a biofuel side on soybeans, because we're going to need some more soybean acres if they get this crush thing right. So hopefully that helps. Long-winded answer, but that's kind of our strategy moving forward after the WASDE report.
That was great. Reese Drenth is with the Ground Level Dispatch, and I was making sure to keep an eye on the email releases you guys had over the course of the last week. And in the description below, there will be a link to a month free trial of what you guys do over there at the Ground Level Dispatch. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yep. So at Ground Level Dispatch, we do grain and agronomy market commentary. We do grain twice a day. We do fertilizer market commentary and chemical market commentary, stuff like that. About once every 3 weeks in longer form, and then in shorter form every Friday. Try to keep things light, 3 to 5 minute read during the week, and then 10 to 15 minute read on the weekend. So give us a try. We'd love to have you.
Reese Drenth is with the Ground Level Dispatch. Thank you so much for joining us on Farm Here Daily.
Thank you.
This is Farm Here Daily, a Field Forward podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Again, in order to continue to produce this type of local content, we would love to have you join our community, so please follow the podcast as well as our social media channels at Field Forward Pod. You can also find me on social media at Geiger Reports. Again, I am your host, David Geiger, and thanks for joining.